morning, everyone. This is the first time that I have given a phytoremediation talk, and so you're sort of a guinea pig audience, and I'm excited both to share some things that I've been learning and also to get feedback from you all. So the topic that we're tasked with today is to understand a little bit more about the prospects by which the ways that we as humans can modify our local environment may actually feed back to the carbon cycle on the planet. And I'm phrasing that in terms of this question, which is very much a topical issue of research now, which is how much do organisms actually influence the carbonate chemistry of coastal waters. Now, I'm going to assume some knowledge about carbonate chemistry because you have had 2 previous summits on ocean acidification, but fortunately I also know that Stephanie is going to cover more of the carbonate chemistry of seawater in her talk. So there are some things that are connections that you may have to take on faith for now, but she'll explain them. Or if you have questions along the way, also please don't feel shy about asking. Okay, so I'm just going to start with sort of the bottom line of where I'd like to get to, which is that our coastal waters vary in the amount of carbon dioxide that's present in them for a lot of different reasons. There's the main one of variation, which is that atmospheric carbon dioxide is rising due to human activities, and much of that carbon dioxide is being absorbed into aquatic environments. So that's the main one that is really the big reason that we're actually here talking about phytoremediation today, but it's not the one that I'm really going to focus on. That's sort of the motivation, but it's not the variability that is of primary interest here. You also have probably heard that our coastal water can be very high in carbon dioxide because deep water that becomes upwelled naturally has a lot of carbon dioxide in it. So that is also a major factor influencing the carbon dioxide in coastal waters. But again, I'm not going to talk much about it, although I think Stephanie will also address that issue. Okay, so thirdly, rivers. This river that we're next to, which is perfect just to have this visual display. Actually, you shouldn't be looking at the slides, you should be looking out the window because that's where you really see all the information. Rivers are freshwater, and freshwater, if you think of distilled water, has a pH of about 7, and ocean water has a pH above 8, and when you mix those together, you get lower pH where you have freshwater coming in. So that's an oversimplification, but just in general, rivers can also very much influence the carbon dioxide and the pH levels in our coastal environments. I think about that a lot because I encounter it when I work in Willapa Bay, and Stephanie thinks about it less because Netarts actually has very little freshwater influence. So the salinity in Willapa Bay a month ago when I was out measuring it, in some places that are important for oyster farming was 2. And ocean salinity is 30. Meanwhile, in Netarts, the salinity varies between 27 and 30, and that's about all variation that there is. So there's going to be a lot of coastal variability depending on how much freshwater influence there is. Okay, and then finally, the main issue that we really want to talk about today, and which I'll spend a little bit more time on shortly, is the role of biological processes, photosynthesis and respiration, influencing how much carbon dioxide is present. Okay, so then the other main message is that our local ecosystems may tend to remove carbon dioxide, that is, photosynthesis exceeds respiration, or they may tend to add carbon dioxide if respiration exceeds photosynthesis. And that's going to depend on which organisms are abundant, obviously something that humans have some control over, as well as the time of day, whether the sun is shining, and the time of year, whether the days are long or short. So these sorts of issues at the bottom are things that I hope you'll understand a little bit more about where are the most likely places where humans can have an influence in modifying local carbon dioxide through the mechanisms of modification of biological activity. All right, so imagine yourself in the dark with your favorite houseplant. You and your houseplant are both breathing in oxygen, using that to burn up calories and fuel your body, and releasing carbon dioxide which you exhale. This may come as somewhat of a surprise to you to think of your houseplant doing that too, but houseplants, like all living things, need to have oxygen to actually break down sugars to run their bodies, and they also then release carbon dioxide. In the dark, that's all that plants do, but then of course, when you turn on the sun, photosynthesis can happen, and at this point, plants also begin taking up a lot of carbon dioxide, which is their building block to make the sugars that support the rest of the food chain. Okay, so a key, really key issue just to start off with right away, and which I will actually, I think that Dick Sheldon is one of the first people who really emphasized this as well, because he recognized very early on in the invasion of Zostera japonica that having that green plant on the tide flat at night might actually lead to really low oxygen levels that could be detrimental to organisms. Do you remember saying that? I don't know if you did. You brought it up anyway, that Zostera japonica did some other things. Okay, so at night, plants are like any other living thing, taking in oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide. In the daytime, they're taking in a lot of carbon dioxide. And if those plants are things like the plants that we're standing in the midst of right here, and someone takes that material and says, I'm going to build a structure with it that will last 1,000 years, that carbon is sequestered. That is, that carbon is, for a very long period of time, taken out of circulation through the atmosphere. So we are in the midst of a sequestered carbon building. But it is also possible, of course, that those plant parts may die and then actually begin decomposing, which releases carbon dioxide because the microbes then are taking up oxygen, burning up fuel, and exhaling carbon dioxide. So what this intrinsically means is that, although in principle plants are the only thing that can really help us act as biological scrubbers to take carbon dioxide out of the system, there are certainly characteristics of plants that will allow them to store that carbon long term, and not all plants will do that. Okay, so we've been talking about processes that are happening in the air, and I just want to show you some pretty amazing traces that come from atmospheric carbon dioxide. So this trace is the amount of carbon dioxide that is measured at the top of the Space Needle, which I was driving past just 2 hours ago. And this is from, it's a 3-day period from Friday and then over this past weekend. And you can see here, very early on Friday morning, a blip of about 10 parts per million in the carbon dioxide concentration associated with the morning commute. And there's actually not much in the signal of an evening commute, but if you don't believe me, then I'll show you Monday, which is one day later. Again, Monday, this was Saturday, just variable but not really big pattern. Sunday, variable, not big pattern, but here's Monday morning's commute again. So as all those cars are out there clogging the highways, fossil fuels are being burned, carbon dioxide is released. Yeah?
Have you conducted the same analysis on air travel?
That's a great question. It should, because there is there's a very strong daily pattern to air travel. So I have not personally, but it would be really interesting to see if you could tease it out of a bigger signal. The interesting thing in general is that, and this is a really big difference between the air and the water. Gases in the air move really fast. So it's actually sort of amazing that we can even see the morning commute signal in Seattle, because as that carbon dioxide is released, it mixes with the rest of the atmosphere on the planet very fast. In contrast, in the water, gas molecules move really slowly. So we'll get to that in a moment. But it's an interesting point to see whether it would be possible to pick out air travel. and I don't know.
So if I'm hearing this right, water has accumulative properties, more so over than air.
Mm-hmm.
Air
Water makes it hard for those gas molecules to move through. Yes. Yeah. All right, so let's think about air for just one more moment here, because I just also want to show you this seasonal pattern. So this is, the green line shows you the atmospheric carbon dioxide on a coastal buoy that's just offshore here, from 2006 through basically very recently. And then the blue shows you the Space Needle. Much more variability, but generally the same pattern, which is that during the winter time, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes up. And during the summertime, as plants are growing, they draw down the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So you see a wintertime, summertime, wintertime, summertime, really strong seasonal pattern that shows up even in our air atmosphere where the molecules are moving very, very rapidly. Again, though, this variability, so remember the daily variability that we were seeing was around 10 parts per million carbon dioxide. Here the seasonal variability is maybe 30 parts per million carbon dioxide. And I'll just give away that in water the variability can be up to thousands of parts per million in the carbon dioxide concentration. So much more dramatic variation than we see in the air. All right, so here's the, just the slide that reminds me that gases can move very rapidly through the air. So we do see seasonal patterns and we do see blips associated with the morning commute, but basically that gets mixed with the rest of the planet's atmosphere very fast. In contrast, those molecules, those same molecules, move very, very slowly through water. So, if our little human being were actually a mermaid sitting with her houseplant, and we turned off the lights on them, we would find that around these organisms, they would be drawing down the oxygen, they would be exhaling carbon dioxide, and then, again, Stephanie will get to this specifically, but often we measure these patterns most easily as a pH change. Increased carbon dioxide leads to a reduction in pH, or the amount of acidic hydrogen ions that are present in the water. And this would occur as a little bubble around these organisms because the molecules move so slowly. And not a real bubble, but a bubble of influenced water right around those organisms because the molecules are moving slowly through the water. Okay, so this is one of the reasons that you can get much, much higher variability in carbon dioxide or pH in water than you can in air, because the local organisms can really either draw down the oxygen at night, or the plants can really draw down the carbon dioxide during the day, and it doesn't mix well with the rest of the aquatic environment or the air. Sort of like it's almost happening inside a jar where there's just a little bit of movement that happens out the sides of the jar. Okay, so ready for the quiz? Not really. But I did think it might be helpful to sort of frame these as questions and ask you to think about them, because if I've done my job correctly, these questions shouldn't be as sort of mysterious as they were at the beginning of the day. So at what time of day would you expect carbon dioxide to be drawn down the most by biological activity, and simultaneously oxygen released the most? Would you expect that low carbon dioxide time to be during the day or during the night?
Early morning and sunset or in the evening.
Okay, so you're saying right at the transition periods is when you might see the biggest differences. And just after the night, would you expect carbon dioxide to be lowest or highest? Highest, that's right, because everything's just been respiring over the night. And at the end of the day, that's when you would expect to see carbon dioxide the lowest, because you've had the most amount of photosynthesis happen. Well done. I have to say, you guys are way ahead of me because my initial reaction was, oh, I'd expect the lowest amount of CO2 when the sun is right overhead, but actually it's offset so that the lowest amount of CO2 is after there's been the longest possible amount of light to draw down that CO2.
So can it be assumed, like water, when air is heaviest, at its coldest time, the same would go with water, and that water is acting as a magnet to this chemical?
My best intuition about temperature, which is very important in terms of how much gas water can hold, is the analogy of a tea kettle. When you boil water, you drive off a lot of the oxygen gas that's in water. Hot water holds less gas. Same deal out here. Warmer water will hold less gas. So it tends to make it easier for the gas to move out.
I like the tea kettle analogy. I like the soda can analogy. If you've ever had a soda, you know that it has more bubbles in it when it's colder, and when it gets warm, it gets flat. So that's the same thing. Hot liquids don't hold as much gas.
So that means oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things also to keep in mind, although there's many things to keep in mind, right? But this is good to ask about it, is that we are on one hand are talking about how much gas would be in the water if it were perfectly balanced with the atmosphere above it. And if the water is colder, it can absorb more gas and still be balanced with the air above it. But many times, water is not balanced with the air above it because the gases move so slowly through the water and they come into equilibrium with the air so slowly that they're actually out of balance with the atmosphere above. And that's the reason that the variability in water can be so much higher, on the order of thousands of parts per million in carbon dioxide, as opposed to the air where we saw maybe 30 on a seasonal basis. All right, so you got this answer correct. I'm going to actually show you results from 30 years ago. People were doing this 30 years ago. These are results that were collected over a seagrass bed by some really wonderfully smart estuarine chemists. And what they found is that at 18 o'clock, the end of the day, that's when you had the highest pH or the lowest CO2, just as we predicted. And then through the night, the pH went down as the carbon dioxide went up. So these data have been around for quite a while, but they have new meaning now that we're thinking of it in the context of what can we do about ocean acidification. All right, your next challenge. So Stephanie and I will be talking a lot about the role of seagrass because it's a plant that lives in the water, but phytoplankton and algae similarly are photosynthesizers that are in the water. I just have seagrass here. But I'd like to think about your expectation of how fast anything that's photosynthesizing in the light might be able to suck up carbon dioxide or scrub out the carbon dioxide, depending on whether it's in shallow water or deep water. So do it faster in shallow water or faster in deep water. And then also, depending on whether there's just a little bit of plant material there or lots of plant material there. Maybe this is the easier one. Would you expect this relation to be increasing, flat, or decreasing? As you go from a little bit of seagrass to a lot of seagrass, then the rate at which the carbon can be drawn out of the water is likely to go up because there's just more stuff there that can photosynthesize. Yeah. Okay, but what about the water depth? How would you expect that that might actually influence how fast carbon dioxide is scrubbed out? Thoughts about that?
Too many factors. If you're shallow, that means you get more sunlight, so you're going to have more photosynthesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're shallow, it also means the water warms up, which means it can hold less gas.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay, I'm going to give you the first one for sure. That the plants in shallow water may be better able to actually reach their maximum photosynthetic rate, for sure. And then I'll sort of give you the second one, although point out that this is a case where we're expecting that the aquatic environment is likely to be out of balance with the air. So even though it's true that warm water can hold less, it still is holding it because it takes so long to off-gas. So the time frame that we're talking about would actually allow carbon dioxide to basically be drawn down below what you might expect from the atmosphere. So the other main issue is that in deep water, it's like, I don't have a good analogy for this, although I need one. You all can help me with this. In deep water, basically you have to scrub, those plants have to scrub more volume. And since they are required to scrub more volume, they probably can do a worse job of it because they can only take out so much carbon, and that carbon is from a larger tank of material.
I work in the business of heat, and would the thermodynamics take place here where cold seeks warm?
Yes.
And that would cause the circulation process?
Yeah, that's great. So yes, absolutely, except that in aquatic environments, if you have warm water on top of cold water, it actually makes it hard to mix. So it is one way by which actually the deep water is less likely to get mixed with the atmosphere because it's actually separated thermally. It's thermally stratified. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
That's very interesting because it's just the opposite with air. Cold seeks heat. I mean,
Yeah, that you would tend to balance them out. That's right, yeah. And in aquatic environments, I think I'm correct here, that when there's different temperatures of water, especially with warm on top and cool on the bottom, it tends to create situations in which that warm water stays at the top with all the stuff in it that it has, and the cold water is sort of insulated from the air.
What natural currents wouldn't they have an impact on that process?
Yes, okay, and in a couple of ways. Better mixed water is going to be just more homogeneous in its carbonate chemistry as well. So if water that's mixed thermally also will be mixed in terms of the gases that it carries. And then there's another part to it, but I forgot it.
Sorry.
I'm going to go on to another question. Yeah, go ahead.
It seems to me that turbidity and clarity are part of this, so I was thinking what causes the turbidity is the same water same currents that might churn up and introduce more oxygenation. But clarity is a huge issue, and when we're trying to capture dynamics, I'm thinking of coral reefs where the water's not clear or clear.
Yes, right, okay. So, and this reminds me of the second part of the question, which is that it is the case that slight motion at the water surface can accelerate the exchange of gases between the water and the atmosphere. But overall, it's really, really hard to overcome very much. So even though there are slight differences that can occur in terms of how fast the gases balance between the air and the water, we're still always limited, even with a little bit of turbulence at the
I was
top.
thinking more of light getting through temperature stratification.
Yeah.
If you don't have good clarity, you still might not get the photosynthesis.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I'm
And
wondering if that comes into the equations anywhere.
it does, especially as many of the very back of the envelope calculations that I've done, I've assumed that the photosynthesizers are light saturated. So anything that reduces the amount of light, could be water depth, could be the turbidity, will reduce the photosynthetic rate and therefore also reduce how fast the scrubbers work. Yeah. All right, I'm looking at my time and realizing I'm supposed to be done now. But I'm going to just give you a couple more things, but hopefully not too fast. So we just talked through this, that we would expect it to be more difficult to reduce the concentration of carbon dioxide in deep water than in shallow water because of lower photosynthetic rates and also because more volume has to be scrubbed. But that as you add more and more biomass, photosynthetic biomass, that will tend to increase the rate at which the scrubbing can happen. And I've just put these in as straight lines because they are straight lines. They're very simple relationships. As you add twice as much biomass, you expect twice as much carbon to be able to be removed. No funny, unexpected things. All right. The lovely thing is that I know that the next point I wanted to make is something that Stephanie's going to cover anyway. So I am just going to scroll through this and return to the main messages here. So hopefully through this introduction you've had a good opportunity to think a lot more about photosynthesis and respiration and the fact that having plants present in the day will tend to remove carbon dioxide, but actually might increase the variability because those plants will be respiring at night. And that in order to be net autotrophic, that is, a system tends to actually effectively scrub carbon dioxide out, it's going to depend on which organisms are abundant, disproportionately plants that actually store carbon over long periods of time. And that it's going to vary through the time of day because of the amount of sunlight that's been present and the time of year because of how much biomass is present and also how long the days actually are. Okay, I am now just going to show you a couple of fun pictures that show you what we're up to in terms of actually collecting some data. This device actually is one that Stephanie's advisor built. It was our sort of first iteration of a way of putting a very complicated sensor onto the back of our boat and then being able to actually drive around while we pump water through those sensors and map the carbonate chemistry, the pH, and the concentration of carbon dioxide that was present in that water. The next iteration that we are moving to, just because of financial constraints, actually is a modification of a sensor that is currently in use in medicine. So if you're in the hospital and you have a hard time exhaling your carbon dioxide, your blood you can get acidosis. And there are sensors that have been developed that use a little spot of a permeable membrane that carbon dioxide can get through and interact with a dye, and then an optical probe to actually figure out what the amount of carbon dioxide is that is present in blood. So there is a German company that's been working on modifying the parameters of this so that it works in seawater. Have no idea if ultimately it will be a field deployable product, but it would be on the order of maybe $1,500 or $2,000 instead of $30,000. Not so accurate, but when you're measuring variability on the order of thousands, may be sufficient. Another thing that we have done a lot is actually anchored sensors in particular places to be able to measure the water properties as the water moves past these sensors. And we also have pioneered some work where we attach sensors to these floating drifters, which are designed specifically to be able to go into very shallow water. Many oceanographic drifters are probably sort of as big as this room and quite deep because they need to be only tracking the water and not influenced by the winds that are passing over. We can't use ours in strong winds, but in light winds they do a very nice job of showing us where the water is moving, and then the sensors that are attached to those actually tell us how the properties of the water are changing as those sensors move. Okay, and I think with that, I'm going to stop because if I start on the next part, it's going to be 20 minutes of data about Willapa Bay, which I'd love to tell you about, and there may be other opportunities to do that. But I will stop there because I feel like at this point, hopefully you're a little bit inspired about the prospects of how organisms may influence the carbonate chemistry of the water, but also just keeping in mind that plants also respire, and so there may be issues associated with day-night variability or just long-term carbon sequestration that we need to keep in mind in terms of figuring out what phytoremediation might do.
The MRCs and the WACMAC are producing a data map that the state is producing. Is your data going to go into this data map?
Not that I know of, although I'd be happy to have it go into that data map. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk with the people